Okay, I should go start this one with something positive. Two positive things, in fact. Um, the video is going to be about Labour and reform, and it's a political video, but there's a few things I want to cover first, so bear with me. I always say with these longer videos, multitask, clean dishes, multitask in some way, because I just don't do snapshot videos. I don't think it covers the sort of ground that I want to cover, so I don't do it that way. Um, the two positive things, I saw a post on X from LBC with Nick Ferrari, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley. It's a follow up to this awful expose of Metropolitan Police officers coming out with some disgustingly bigoted comments. Um, so Mark Rowley has said he would like to see them actually taken off the payroll, like sacked basically, which is what I argued should be the case. I don't think suspension goes far enough. To be completely fair to Rowley, though, perhaps it is unfair to put it all on him. He is commissioner, but he has pointed out that if he made this analogy, if he were the head of John Lewis or another company like that, and some employees were caught doing this, they would just be sacked immediately. But because of the framework that's in place, the IOPC needs to find incontrovertible evidence of wrongdoing in order to fast track the process of sacking them. And in this case, it looks like it's pretty clear cut. So, a success for investigative journalism. And the good news is they aren't only going to be suspended, they probably will be sacked, as they should be. I've no sympathy with them. I really think that those sort of attitudes, you can't wear a uniform and have those attitudes, whether you're on or off duty. I just don't believe that they will suddenly change their attitudes when they're on duty. It's too big of a liability. So to be completely fair to Commissioner Riley, he wants to do that. That's a good thing. The other good thing that I welcome, and I should say the references I'm making in this video are now a few days old. September the 27th is Times weekend paper I'm taking the references from. So yeah, they're a few days old now, but still relevant. E-deals can reduce need for tax rises, hints Reeves. Britain needs to sign an ambitious migration deal with the EU that allows young Europeans to live and work here, bolstering economic growth and reducing the need for tax rises in the budget, Rachel Reeves has said. The reports by Stephen Swinford and Oliver Wright. Well, my main video is not about that. But you know what? I welcome it. I really don't understand the Brexit hysteria over free movement of young people. We're not talking here about illegal migrants. We're talking about students from France, the Czech Republic, Germany, Denmark, etc. I see no reason why that would be a problem for our economy. You know, when they're studying here and they spend a lot of money to do so, they spend in the UK. I just don't know why anyone would have a problem with it. And if that, I welcome it. I've been pretty critical of this Chancellor, but I think that's a good move, and I've always said that I welcome the EU reset. Of course, Labour has to be careful not to be seen to be, it's a secret plot to rejoin the EU, but frankly, I think it's a welcome thing, so that's good. Now, there's just a disclaimer I want to put out. In my last video regarding the terrorist attack in Manchester, I said that it was the first terror attack in this country since the Reading attack in 2020. I do want to touch on that because some people might, catch me out on that. Of course, we've had violence since then. We had the atrocity against those three little girls last year in Southport. We had the attack in Nottingham in 2023, and there was a mass shooting in Plymouth in 2021. To the victims, of course, those incidents are terrorism. And actually, in the Plymouth case, it could be ideological terrorism, as it was probably motivated by misogyny, like this sort of incel extremism. But there is a reason why not every act of violence is called terrorism. In this case, it was all unquestionably anti-Semitic hatred, so therefore it makes sense it's designated as terrorism. If the attack in Southport was hatred of girls, then that would also be terrorism. But there are cases in this country, for example, of familicides. There was one in Luton where the killer killed his mother and siblings, an awful, heinous crime, yet no one calls that terrorism. So not every act of violence is designated as terrorism, and that's a controversial issue in of itself. But certainly the attack in Manchester would be the first big, specifically Islamist attack I would say, since the Reading attack of 2020. I just want to set the record clear on that. In no way am I intending to downplay the other acts of violence. Okay, so Labour and reform. I'll be honest, up to this point I'd sort of taken the view, no, reform, there's too much hyperbole around this. How does a party go from having 5 MPs to winning a general election? I just thought it was exaggerated, and I thought that it was a mistake for Sir Ed Davey and Sir Keir Starmer to focus so much on reform, like give reform the oxygen and publicity they want. But this shouldn't be totally dismissed. Strange things have happened in politics. We had Brexit, we had Trump. Strange things have happened in politics in the last decade. So it's not inconceivable with the way politics is today that a party could go from having just a handful of MPs to winning a general election. So it shouldn't be dismissed. This particular copy of the Times is focusing heavily on the Labour Party conference. I personally can't think of a party that's went from a general election landslide to losing popularity in such a short space of time as this current Labour government has. I mean, again, I would compare this to what would be 15 months after Blair took office. So let's say May 97 would be July, August 1998. August 1998, Labour was still in a pretty strong position. Of course it had its dissenters, but nothing like this. There's a piece on Andy Burnham and why that could be, why it's just a distraction. Apparently Labour insiders are saying it's like Bonnie Prince Charlie coming over and then of course being defeated at the Battle of Culloden. That's the analogy that was used. There's another ongoing joke within Labour circles of, I'll just recite this joke actually as well. There's a Times cartoon, credit of Peter Brooks. That's basically the way the joke goes, Mr. or someone comes into a bar with a card saying, I think it's saying, now let me get this right, actually I'm going to mess up that joke. Let me just say this correctly because it's a good one. Where are we here? Is a joke that has been pinging around Cabinet Ministers' WhatsApp groups this week. A Blairite, a Brownite, a Corbynite and a Starmerite walk into a Manchester bar. What are you having, Andy? The barman says. The implication being that Andy Burnham doesn't know what he is. The thing is, he's a popular politician. He's a popular mayor of Greater Manchester. But to me, this looks a little bit like Dean Phillips in the Democratic Party in the United States going against Biden. A little bit. I mean, I would say Burnham's a bigger figure than Dean Phillips, proportionally speaking. But, I just don't think having another Prime Minister is what this country needs. I think that Starmer in many ways is not a great Prime Minister. He's not a good communicator. He's stiff, he's lawyerly, I don't think he's stupid, but I just don't think he is. I think in some ways one gets the impression that he's always reacting to situations rather than having a control on situations on so many issues. And so many Labour policies are contradictory. But I'm just going to read out a piece from the Times on reform, on the latest polling on reform. There's also an expose, or not expose, but a report about yet another reform person who's associated with Russia, and I'll come to that gradually. In fact, you know what, I'll just read it out now. Here it is. Ex-reform leader in Wales paid for Putin propaganda. I'm not going to read out the whole report, but basically a former member of the European Parliament has admitted taking bribes to make pro-Russia statements in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine. Nathan Gill, 52, was elected as an MEP for UKIP in 2014 when Nigel Farage was leader. He went on to become leader of the Reform Party in Wales. Gill admitted to 8 charges of accepting cash bribes for the improper performance by him of his function or activity of the holder of a position in the European Parliament between December 2018 and June 2019. The case will increase concerns about Russia's intelligence and black propaganda activities in the UK. In December 2018, Gill received a script from Voloshin. This was Oleg Voloshin, a senior government official under Mykola Azarov and Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian Ukrainian prime ministers. for his contribution to debate on the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement and informed he would receive Christmas gifts and postcards said to be coded references to money. And yeah, that's like I say, the whole report's there for reference. But this is not the first time that Reform has had a Putin sympathiser in its midst. I remember their candidate for Salisbury, of all places, was praising Putin. Farage himself has praised Putin. This is why I just do not trust Reform on foreign policy. But back to the main point of the video, this polling and why I think, like you can see, there's a whole piece here on the Labour Party conference. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese addressed that and was very supportive of Starmer and what he was saying about the Labour movement worldwide. Starmer, of course, has said that there's an open fight between Labour and Reform. So Starmer's bringing the fight to Reform, and he is clearly seeing Reform as a threat, as a strategy that may be the only choice he has if the polls are correct. So here we go. Reform close to majority if election were held today. This is September the 27th, 2025. The report's by Stephen Swinford and Chris Smith. I'll just read out because it's not too long. Reform UK is close to having enough support to form a majority government if an election were held today, a survey suggests. YouGov's second seat-by-seat poll since Labour's election victory last year suggests that Nigel Farage's chances of entering Downing Street has significantly increased, putting him in pole position to become Prime Minister. Reform, which has just 5 MPs, is on track to have 311, which would make it comfortably the largest party in a hung parliament. It is a significant improvement on the last such poll in June, when the party was on track to have 271 MPs and would put it within touching distance of the 326 needed for an outright majority. In other words, if it keeps going this way, the polling could suggest that they have that. The latest multi-level repression and post-stratification poll, MRP, found Labour's position continuing to worsen. Sir Keir Starmer won 411 seats at the last election, but has since suffered a collapse in the polls. YouGov's last MRP in June put Labour on 178 MPs, a total which has now fallen to 144, so their wipeout would be as embarrassing as the Tories. It suggests Labour would lose 267 of the seats it won in 2024. Potential cabinet casualties include Bridget Phillipson, who's one of the MPs here in Sunderland, John Healey, Pat McFadden, Wes Streeting and Yvette Cooper. The MRP, which was based on a survey of more than 11,000 people, maps party political support down to constituency level and is widely seen as the most accurate way of measuring how votes will translate into Westminster constituency winners. Questions over Sir Keir Starmer's leadership are intensifying ahead of Labour's conference this weekend, with critics publicly calling on him to change course. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, said Labour MPs have asked him if he is willing to stand against Starmer in a leadership contest. According to the poll, the Tories would lose 76 seats, leaving Kimmy Badenoch's party with just 45 MPs. That's, appalling, well below the Liberal Democrats. The poll has the Lib Dems on 78 MPs, slightly up from 72, the SNP on 37, the Greens on 7 and Plaid Cymru on 6. The shift in the poll suggests Reform will be able to form a majority government with the Conservatives. Labour could not form a majority even if it were to negotiate a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, Plaid Cymru and the Greens. So it would be an absolute victory for the right. But that of course means the Tories would be the junior partner to Reform, so they kind of get a taste of their own medicine to know where the Lib Dems were in 2015. That's astonishing. There is one thing to say though. I think it would be a mistake to get into American style punditry. That is to say, it's a minimum of 2.5 years to the next general election, even if there were an early general election in 2027. There's no sign of a general election happening next year. So a lot can happen in that time. But it's clear that Labour is in trouble. Now, the only thing that I think will stop Reform in its course is some massive scandal or serious infighting. For me, this is bad news because I do not trust Reform. I don't trust them. I don't trust them on international policies and even a lot of domestic policies. I do not trust them. I don't like Reform. I don't trust Farage. I don't trust their, their position on Russia. I don't trust Farage's sycophantic views, like relationship with Trump. I don't trust them on Israel and Gaza. I mean, you could be sure that Reform will be absolutely 100% pro-Israel. They'll probably reverse everything the government's done in that regard. Farage would probably lift the sanctions on those extremists in Netanyahu's cabinet. I think that's morally contemptible. I wouldn't put it past him to do that. It hasn't happened yet, but I just think that's what they will do. It's my speculation. And in terms of domestic politics, the only thing that I would really think of with Reform is, okay, they say they're going to be the toughest party ever on crime. I do think we should be tough on crime. I do think, I've said this over and over again, our justice establishment is living on another planet. They do not understand public sentiments, at least not sufficiently. So if Reform really does get hard line on crime, good. My issue with Reform on that area, even there I don't entirely trust them, because I think they cherry pick the crime that they care about. This obsession with migrants, I totally agree that a migrant committing crime should be thrown out. They don't have a right to be here. And there's definitely some very unsavoury characters we should not have in this country. There was a Kosovan who was just convicted to 39 years minimum at the Old Bailey for a vicious gangland murder of another teenager. He was 21 when sentenced. And this thug actually threatened the judge and said, I'll do a third of the time and then come back to get you. Now, those are the sort of people that absolutely should not be in this country. So if Reform cracks down on crime genuinely, I'm not going to complain about that. But last year, when those violent riots were going on, the first thing that Farage said was to blame immigration. A responsible leader should have immediately condemned the violence, then go on and talk about immigration. But the first thing Farage done was blame immigration. And then of course they say, of course we condemn the violence. And I think there's a reluctance by Farage and his party to crack down hard on right-wing thuggery. Just because they know full well that it might be useful for them. Now, Farage has been at pains to say that anyone who has had, for example, National Front background or any sort of links like that have not been welcome in Reform. But, if you look at some of the things that have come out from Reform councillors, the idea that this is just a centre-right party, I don't buy it. It's definitely hard right, it's definitely populist right. And, that's not come out of nothing. But I just don't trust Reform. That's my gut feeling. Also, their plans to make life harder for legal migrants is contemptible. Why should someone who's playing by the rules, contributing to this country, who has an affection for this country, why should you make their life harder? Why give them more bureaucracy? And again, this is part of a wider issue, and I think Labour is doing it as well. When we think of immigration, it's just this overwhelmingly negative sort of atmosphere. I mean, I am absolutely not naive. Like I say, there's some very unsavoury characters who should not be here. And I do think that judges who make it hard to deport those people are a disgrace. They are letting down the British public. I agree with that. I agree that we need to control our borders. I agree that it's simply not sustainable to have this endless flow of people coming in. And I think the left are not only naive, I think they're incredibly reckless with this, to say just let everyone in. I'm talking about the far left. But I do have a problem with just generally portraying immigration in a negative light. It's Indian doctors, Filipino nurses who are helping British citizens. It's those people who, often in care work as well. I just have a problem with this overwhelmingly negative rhetoric around immigration. And the thing with Labour, it's very little that Labour's getting right. I wish it could be more positive. Like I say, I welcome the EU reset. There's a few things Labour has done that I agree with. I welcome the EU reset. I think that recognising Palestine it's just consistent with their party stance. And, that's in keeping with the international consensus. I think it's justified. I welcome the condemnation of Israel's brutal actions in Gaza. That's all good. But I don't trust Labour on China. I think they have been soft on China. Russia and Ukraine, I think they've got it right. Yeah, they've been consistently... I did find it refreshing when Zelensky came back from that awful meeting in Washington where he was gaslit by Vance and Trump, and that the appalling way he was treated there. I did find it refreshing to see Starmer welcome him at number 10. That was, good to see. But domestically, there is sore points. Labour has contradictory messages on crime. They claim that they're going to be tough on law and order issues, on antisocial behaviour, and yet we have this absurd situation where they raise or lower the voting age to 16, yet young offenders are acting with impunity. I was going to make a video specifically on this, particularly at the moment in southern resort towns, places like Hastings and Bournemouth and other such resort towns. They're absolutely running wild. I came across a video by a guy in Southampton and talking about young offenders there acting with impunity, and in London and elsewhere, teenage girls are saying to shopkeepers, you can't do anything about this, the police don't care. And the shocking thing is they're right. There's really low trust in the police right now. It would be unfair to blame all of that on Labour, but things like, for example, the free speech issue, Starmer has been utterly tone deaf on that. Every single time this has come up, his attitude is, we have a long-standing tradition of free speech in this country. He is not understanding. He is not understanding the concerns people have over thought policing and over the use of non-crime hate incidents. Starmer either doesn't seem to get it, or his advisors aren't doing their job properly. Because if he doesn't grasp the anger about that, the concern about that, then rightly or wrongly people are going to blame the government. And I don't think it's entirely the government's fault. I do think it's overzealous police forces, and this is also pre-existing legislation. But Starmer could really take a strong stance on that and say, I believe in free speech and I'm going to prove it. I call on the police. He should say this publicly, so there's no room for doubt. I call on the police to use common sense and stop prosecuting people over social media posts. Even offer to change the law. That would be widely popular. And yes, Starmer might be accused of only reacting to sentiment, but it would be better than nothing. So I think, he's been tone deaf on that issue. Of course he's right to say that genuine incitement should be prosecuted, but he is not getting the concern that people have. And that's frustrating, because of course reform's going to pick up on that. Starmer is right to say that actual incitement should be prosecuted, but that's not what people are being harassed over. In every case, there's cases of people simply using spicy language, not actually threatening anyone. And I think Labour is not, they're just tone deaf on this. The ID card thing, I don't think it's as sinister as some people are implying, and it is used in other countries, other democratic countries. But again, even there, it looks like big statism. And how's that going to be rolled out? I mean, if it's an app, or how's it going to work for people who don't have smartphones? They say the technology is going to work well. Is it? I mean, they say it's going to reduce bureaucracy. I think that, over-reliance on technology can increase bureaucracy if it doesn't work. It'll probably be defeated in Parliament because all the other parties oppose it. I mentioned the issue about law and order. On one hand, Labour talks stuff, and yet they've had early release programmes, and they have a prisons minister, and perhaps I'm giving him more weight than he deserves, but I'm talking about Lord Timpson, who says we punish too many people. In other words, the thugs who are in prison, Timpson doesn't think they should be there, most of them. I thoroughly disagree with that. When you have someone who is a repeat offender over and over and over again, there's absolutely no sane reason they shouldn't be in prison. But again, I wouldn't blame this all on the government. I do put a lot of blame on judges, soft judges. I think they deserve more public scrutiny. I don't really buy the argument that their hands are tied, because if they really feel that is the case, they could speak up. Those judges could speak up and do something about it. They could say, give us the power to pass proper sentences. But they're not doing that. They're just saying, it's my hands are tied, I can't do anything about it, I just have to pass this sentence. The sentencing council are useless. I've no respect for them, I've no faith in them whatsoever. I don't think they have any understanding of public opinion, despite what they claim. So anyway, I digress. One of the big sore points for me is on welfare. When people elect a Labour government, they don't want them to be Tory-esque. And this is something that Labour isn't grasping. Pat McFadden is just going to follow on from Liz Kendall's hardline approach on welfare. They say that they're trying to get people back into work, but if they don't have an understanding of the challenges disabled claimants face, you know, there is a tone deafness to that. Now, I get it. There are people who abuse the system, and there probably are. I'll be honest. There are probably people on sickness benefits who shouldn't be on that, and that is costing a lot of money. I'm not naive. I get that. But what angers me about Labour's approach is they keep talking about working people. The way they treat disabled claimants, the way they treat claimants, is absolutely no better than the Tories. You know, it's always speaking about them in a negative sense, and I just think, again, most of the public are unaware of the sanction culture at the DWP. That's the reality. It's actually very, very rigid. I mean, the things Labour have done, for example, talking about pressuring airlines to hand over information and this sort of thing, they're going even further than the Tories. So I think what the real risk for Labour is, I mean, this is the problem Labour is in. They're polarising everyone. They're not pleasing the right, despite the tough talk on immigration and crime and so on, because many reform voters see it as just like desperation and trying to catch up with them. And they're already convinced Labour's not the party for them. And they're polarising the left, because many people on the left see Starmer as too cosy with Trump, too hard on welfare claimants, and even on the Palestine issue, recognising Palestine, sanctioning Israeli ministers, they've then prescribed Palestine action, which includes people simply holding up placards. Now, I don't think Palestine action's totally innocent. I do think there's criminal elements there and anti-Semitic elements. But on so many issues, Labour is contradictory. So for a party that's been in power for just 15 months, they look like a party that's more at the end of their run, not at the start. Labour's made a real mess of this first year. Not everything should be blamed on Labour. That is unfair. A lot of these problems were inherited by the Tories. Nevertheless, I think that Labour has polarised left-wing support. Those people are now going to go to the Liberal Democrats or the Greens. And they're not even helping to get over right-wing support. So Labour has something of an identity crisis, which has often been the problem of the Labour Party. I don't say everything they've done is bad, and I always try to be fair with these things. But for me, what would make me change my view on Labour and perhaps vote for them, it would be this: to take a more compassionate approach to some social issues, which is what Labour should be about. Instead of being Tory-esque on welfare, they should be understanding of the real needs that people have, and understanding that people who suffer from fibromyalgia, for example, are not fit to do a 9-to-5 job, as Liz Kendall and Pat McFadden seem to think. They should also not approach the issue of immigration in such a negative way. Yes, they need to crack down on illegal immigration. I have no problem with that. But just trying to be reform-esque and talking about immigration in negative terms, I'm not convinced that's the right approach either. There is some things Labour says which I agree with. They were right to condemn Elon Musk along with the Liberal Democrats. I totally agree with them on that. Elon Musk can stay the hell out of British politics. He is not simply having an opinion. He's trying to interfere in our democracy. So yeah, I mean, look, if it's a vote tomorrow between Labour and Reform, I'd reluctantly vote Labour, simply because I do not trust Reform. But I am disappointed by Labour. There's many things more than disappointed I'm deeply unhappy with. Of course, the good thing is we have more parties to choose from. Right now, the Liberal Democrats are the most likely choice for me. And even there, I'm not overly, they're certainly more to the left than I am on crime. I'm not convinced of the Lib Dems are crime. I also think they haven't spoken out enough on free speech. However, I like the fact that Davey has really been vocal about Donald Trump. I like the fact that he's vocal on other areas of foreign policy. That's a good thing to me. One more thing, the Times has a piece on Shabana Mahmood saying that if she can prove that a Muslim Labour Home Secretary can be tough on illegal immigration and crime whilst also making a case for diversity, that might actually be a major asset to Labour and would differentiate them from Reform. This is a piece by Fraser Nelson. So there's several years to go. Labour isn't finished yet, but this polling is really not looking good for them. I'm not really sure what they can do. They've polarised so many people at this point. They need to really roll back on some of the. They need to look at where they're polarising people. Starmer needs to make a bold statement on freedom of speech. Really make his position clear. Not these weak statements about we've always supported free speech in this country. That doesn't talk about his record. It doesn't talk about his party's record. And you know, these things pre-existed before he took office, but they are happening on his watch, and he needs to do something about it. He needs to say very clearly to the police, use common sense. You know, don't arrest people because they've said something on social media that is non-threatening. That's absurd. Don't waste police resources sending 5 uniformed officers to someone's house over a social media post, etc. Yeah, so I think the next general election may well end up being a fight between Labour and Reform. So perhaps Starmer is right to focus on Farage, but I looked at the Reform page and Farage is loving it. You know, he has this little sarcastic thing showing a bottle with his image on it and showing Starmer grasping the bottle, obsession. You know, again, Davy's doing the same thing, so there is a risk of giving Farage too much publicity. I mean, at the moment, it's far too disproportionate for a party that has only 5 MPs. I mean, if we're going by the size of parties, it should be Labour, the Tories, and Lib Dems in that order. And yet it isn't. It's Reform and Labour that are getting all the attention. Labour for the wrong reasons. Right. There was a lot to cover there, but I think it was important. 2 big pieces if you're still watching at this point. New Archbishop of Canterbury is the first woman in over 1,400 years. Sarah Mullally, I think she's the Bishop of London, and Dame Patricia Routledge passed away today at 96, well known for her role in keeping up appearances. Just throw those things in there if I don't upload a video covering them. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts. Labour versus Reform. I don't trust Reform, but I think that in order to beat them, Labour's going to have to really look at some of the areas it's failing, which is some of the things I've spoken about on free speech, on polarising the left, and looking like they're reacting to events rather than taking control of them.